And Steve Gilliland is joining us. He's a Hall of Fame speaker, best-selling author, and founder of Steve Gilliland Inc. I'm so glad to have you both. I wish we were in the studio together, but this global pandemic had other plans for us, so it's changed how we live, play, engage, and most importantly, how we do our work. So that brings me to the first question under the topic of leading during a pandemic. Got lots of experience at it, right? 9 months into this. So the first question, you can tell me who wants to take it. Despite what we've heard from big tech, only a few workplaces are going fully virtual. Most are adopting a hybrid model, with some people working at home part-time or full-time, while the rest are together physically. Now, in this type of working environment, how can HR leaders recreate the idea factories and workplace culture that enables an inclusive workforce to thrive?
Well, thanks for having me, Johnny. And Steve, it's good to be with you as well. I think that's such a really good question, right? And I think as we sort of get to this sort of third phase of the pandemic, which is as we see the numbers tick up, we also know that a vaccine is in distribution. A lot of managers are trying to figure out how do we make the workplace more collaborative when we used to have everybody in the office and we could sort of gather around the table and talk through ideas. And I think it's really about understanding that people bring their whole selves to work. And when you're working from home, or you have some folks working remotely, they're bringing more than their whole selves because they're coming to you from their homes. So how do you incorporate that into these conversations? How do you create maximum flexibility across the board to allow workers to engage in the sort of ideal factories that you talk about, while also understanding that some of them might have responsibilities with virtual schooling with their children. They might have an elderly parent in the home that might make it harder for them to get back to the office right away. So it's really just considering the whole person and what they bring to your work environment and how you make adjustments to accommodate them. Dealing that we're all sort of adjusting in this very interesting time period that the country and the world is in.
As a follow-up, Richard, this is something I really want you to speak to a little bit, and that is this idea that the media, frankly, would lead you to believe that everyone's working remotely. And we know that somewhere between 40 and 55% of the American workforce never had the luxury of working remotely. It's easy to think about, the headlines being everyone's working remotely, but we know that when you go to your Walmart store, 1.5 million employees, they're one of our corporate members, right? So they're saying, my employees didn't have the luxury of working remotely if you wanted to walk into a Walmart store. We look at pharmacies. We look at, you might order food to be delivered to your home, but that means someone had to deliver it to your home. We look at the men and the women who are at UPS and FedEx. There are a lot of Americans working and who've worked every day through this process. What would you say to them? Because the headline would suggest that they're in the minority, and the fact of the matter is a lot of people had to continue working.
Right. I think that's such a good point, John. And I think it speaks to my previous argument, which is why what business leaders should be doing and HR managers should be doing is really having robust, frank conversations with their workers, right, and with their workforce, because you are absolutely correct. The UPS delivery person or the FedEx delivery person or the cashier at the Walmart, they've been at work every day. But what's happening at home for them in a lot of cases is that their children are at home in virtual school. So they're trying to do this juggling act of balancing it all. And where HR managers and business leaders can be very effective is by saying, how can we be helpful to you? What type of flexibility can we give you to make your life a little bit easier? So when you come to work, you bring that joy, you bring that inspiration, you bring that innovation in with you every day to the workplace. And I think a lot of them, that doesn't exist in a world where you're not communicating with them and they're dealing with so much change happening at home.
So I'm going to go back to that a little later, but I want to turn to Steve for a second. So Steve, in this hybrid model, there's a real danger of creating two separate and possibly unequal workplace cultures. What are some strategies to overcome that and instill equity and inclusion in the workplace? And I want to say, forever, whenever I've spent my years going to talk with affinity groups or employee groups who talk about, why women don't have the sorts of opportunities to climb the corporate ladder as men, or why African Americans don't, underrepresented minorities, particularly in leadership roles. One of the things they complain about is not having access, face time, time to build relationships, one-on-one relationships with other executives. Well, if you're working remotely, it's kind of hard to do that. So there are real consequences potentially as we think about coming out of the pandemic to make sure that we have an equal recovery.
Well, thanks, Johnny, for having me, first of all. And when I look at all of this, communication is a word that everybody talks about. But now it is so critical as to how we communicate and how we literally look at each faction. You mentioned the word hybrid. And I think a lot of skill sets are now going to be, how do I engage the virtual employee? How do I engage the people that are working in the office? And then how do I bring them all together? I mean, I call that a wondrous entanglement, if not a little bit of a challenge. But I think one of the things that I have experienced myself, and one of the things that I've always said to leaders, even before all of this, is sometimes you need to look at smaller. And what I mean by that is sometimes the teams you put together to accomplish something need to be a little bit downsized. Have more teams, just have them smaller so they can be more focused. If you think of the military, think of special ops. It is a in-sync group of people that come together and make sure it's a diverse group, make sure there's a whole lot of thought process, because you had mentioned about Richard, and Richard, I agree. Any advice you can give me with millennials, I am here, all open ears. But, I think when you think about that, when you think of the multi-generational pieces, when you think of how we try to bring everybody together, you have to understand even the perspective that each group brings. And I think that's it. I just said yesterday in a virtual presentation, I said, the glass is half full or half empty, depending if you're pouring or drinking. You've got to have a perspective. And I think sometimes when you get together, that authenticity, that, the truth, the reality check, getting them together and saying, listen, this isn't going to be easy, but here's what we're going to do. We're going to work in some smaller teams, some more dynamics, so that we can communicate easier. We can get even more feedback and more ideas, and then we can pull it together. But I think sometimes, the size is the dynamic that I think people aren't looking at by saying, and I've done this in my own small business, of saying, listen, I want these 4 people to be working on this. Here's your role, here's your responsibility, and then let's bring that back to the bigger group. So, again, I look at the military and I think, special ops is a very in sync team that accomplishes some major things. And they're a very diverse group.
Steve, I love that. Take a big world, but make it feel small. That's a great piece of advice. Turning back to you, Richard, for our workers, and I intended to go back here, COVID-19 has brought workplace flexibility issues to the surface. Some employees, as I've mentioned, have no choice but to work at home because schools are currently virtual. Others struggle with lack of access to high-speed internet or a dedicated distraction-free workspace. We did some research and found that only 40% of organizations that SHRM surveyed say that most of their workers can work remotely and have the technology and the environment to do it. So technology and environment to do it. Especially disadvantaged are customer service workers, general staff, and service field workers. What tools should HR leaders and people managers use to create the most equitable workplaces possible amid all of these challenges?
I think that's such a really good question. I think for me, it starts with the word trust. Can you build trust with the team that you have, right? And when I say that, think about it this way, right? If you have a customer service person, so it might be a 1-800 number that they call into, and the other end is one of your employees who is a customer service individual, and their job is to sit and man this desk from one time to the next time. Engage with them about what their needs are. Find out what their children's schedules are. Just so you are engaged in the process, you know what type of demands they have on their life in this new pandemic world that we live in, and make those adjustments to make their life a little bit easier. If you do that, just that one step of building trust and saying, I'm here with you, I want to work with you, is the first step in building a long-lasting relationship between you and that employee. And they're going to bring their best selves to work because they feel like they're getting the best out of you. And I think when you think about intergenerational teams, especially, think about that as well. Remember that millennials, to understand millennials, the best way to think about it is to understand their story. And remember, millennials were a group of individuals that graduated college during the 2008 recession, right? So they graduated at a time where jobs jobs were scarce, opportunities were scarce, resources were scarce. And now many millennials have just got themselves on their feet. They've just sort of got in their careers. They finally managed to finish their graduate school or their terminal degrees. They're now getting ready to buy a home. And then a pandemic comes and knocks them off their feet again. And so this is a generation of people who are saying, we've been through a lot. And what we really want from our workplaces and what we really want from our managers is honest and real conversations. We want to be part of the team, and we want all of ourselves to be valued in the workplace, not just the skills that we bring to work, but how our diversity, our different ideals, our education, our personal experiences. And we want all of those things to come together in the workplace. And HR managers can be a valuable asset in making sure that becomes a reality.
So, Richard, I want to jump in right there. That's really important. You talk about honesty and transparency, especially when we think about the increasingly diverse workplace. But let's turn to another critical leadership topic that has rocked our workplaces in 2020, and it's about racial justice. So, in August, SHRM launched Together Forward at Work, a new platform that aims to drive racial injustice and inequity out of America's workplaces. And as a part of this effort, we convened a Blue Ribbon Commission on Racial Equity, which is a coalition of business executives and academics that will study and make recommendations for actions and solutions that will positively change the workplace and the workplace experience for Black and other people of color. So, understanding that diversity and inclusion take time, what are some strategies that HR managers, with the help of those committed to safe and welcoming workplace culture, what can they employ today to make their workplaces just a little more equitable?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's about creating measures and indicators, right? If you have a diverse and inclusive workforce, it's going to impact your bottom line. You're going to see revenue match the fact that you are engaging in diversity and inclusion. So create some real indicators that you and your team of managers and the entire company can buy into, believe in, and actually measure their progress. The second thing is really opening up and expanding the scope. Talk to everybody in your workplace. Have a real conversation about the issues that are facing them in their lives. Be honest, be open, don't be afraid of the tough conversation. The tough conversation at the beginning will bring trust on the end and will also create buy-in. And I think the third and the most important thing is market to those that are ignored, right? And both in who your customers are, but as well as who you're hiring. So when you think about how you make your hiring practices, where do you normally post your jobs? Are you only posting on one particular website or another? Is there other things you can go to? Can you make a partnership with a historically Black college or university or with a community college to bring in new individuals into your workforce? And also use the people that you have in your workforce as an asset. Talk to the people on your team. Talk to the folks who you already hired and ask them what they want to see out the company. And try to create real measurable, but more importantly than anything is creating real indicators and making sure they're measurable, making sure they're attainable, and making sure that everybody in the company buys into them. If that happens, it's the beginning of what could be a very much more diverse and inclusive workforce, which will have a direct impact on how folks see you in the marketplace. And I mean, don't take my word for it. Just look at all the companies that have really made the effort on diversity inclusion. And if you look at their stock tickers today, you'll see that most of their stock tickers are through the roof, right? Because they said we're going to make an active effort. And as a result of that, they've actually expanded and created new marketplaces for themselves because people see them as forward-thinking companies.
Well, so Steve, I want you to follow up on this. Diversity should never be the final goal, right? I say this often. We're going to be more diverse just because America's K through 12 public school systems are majority minority. So diversity is coming. But it's about the outcome of efforts to cast a wide net, as Richard just pointed out, for talent and to value the unique experiences and skills each individual brings. How can business leaders better diversify their workforce? Where should they look? What pipeline should they create? And are there any partnerships that can be built?
Well, and Richard makes a great point, Johnny. I think you have to go beyond the scope of where you're at right now. You have to be open to all possibilities. And I think sometimes we just get so narrowly focused that we don't realize that there's this whole pool of talent out there. And yet it's like we're in this singular vision of like, okay, this is what I want and here's where I'm going to go. No, you mentioned the words action and solution, Johnny. You said actions and solutions. I was taught early in my life, make sure that your actions match your beliefs. And there are a lot of companies and organizations that say, well, we believe this and we want this, but I don't see an action plan sometimes. I don't see an action plan, and I certainly don't see solutions. So, for me, one of the things is cast that net wide, make sure that you're using all the resources. And I'm going to bring back a word that I've already used, and that's perspective. A diverse workforce and diverse talent literally opens up a world of possibilities. There are things that are out there, and one of the things post-COVID-19 that you have to do is it's about creating a new process. It's about finding a future that doesn't even exist. And I think that's the thing. There is a future out there that right now doesn't exist, but if you go after the right talent, broad talent, diverse talent, that world is going to surprise you. And as we've all said already, there's just so much for us to do. But Johnny, I'm going to repeat it again. It's the action. Action. Right. You got to take the action. Yep. That's the only way you're going to get solution. Match those actions to your beliefs.
And I want to add to that.
Yes.
Because I think Steve brings up a really good point about action. When you talk about that action also requires allowing your workforce to bring their whole selves to the job, right? People's lived experiences a lot of times can be the difference between action and no action, right? When you're having a conversation with your workers and saying, how do we fix this? They might come up with a unique solution. They might be innovators based on their lived experience. It might not be something they learned in a college classroom. It might not be something they learned in a job training program, but it's something they learned because they lived it. And that is the experience that you want to create.
So you all, let me tell you, you're nailing it, but here's a question. How do you bring other leaders with you who aren't as keen on societal change? So you two get it. I get it. But there are people who are not getting it. And by the way, it's not limited to white males only. There are black people who don't get it. There are straight people who don't get it. There are gay people who don't get it. So how do you specifically, I'd like both of you to take a shot at this, how do you bring other leaders along with you who aren't, frankly, as keen on societal change?
Well, let me start by simply saying, accountability is non-negotiable.
Yeah.
As a leader, you hold each other accountable, whether that is a peer, whether it is, somebody that you're managing that possibly doesn't see it the way you see it. What you do is you not just influence them, you hold them accountable to it. You have to be vulnerable. And I think, Richard, you alluded to this too. You used the word, authenticity, and there's a truth. And I think that's the thing. The realism is finding the truth and sharing that truth with them. Those are not easy conversations. When you go to somebody else and simply say, listen, I care about you, I respect you. However, this is exactly where we're at, and this is exactly where we need to go. You need to be with us. You need to help us. But accountability, non-negotiable.